Welcome to Of Knights and Pilgrims, a podcast about Edmund Spenser's The Faerie Queene, where we walk through each book of The Faerie Queene, canto by canto. This is Canto 2 of Book 1.
Mm-hmm.
You can go back and catch up. We have 2 episodes introducing the poem and one about Canto 1, Book 1. So I encourage you to go back and listen to those if you haven't. Also, it might be helpful for you to listen to a recording of the Faerie Queene to kind of get familiar with the language and the story. There's a great one on LibriVox, read by Thomas Copeland. We have links to it. Also, I'd recommend Roy Maynard's modernization of Book 1, published by Canon Press. It's called Fierce Wars and Faithful Loves, and it is a great way to get engaged with the story and the details of the poem without getting too bogged down in some of those spelling. And he's got some great notes in here that keep you on track.
All true. Also, I'm David Grubbs, and you're Christian Leithart.
I forgot about that. Yes. Thank you for thank you. Okay, we are in Canto 2. So do you want to bring us up to speed? What's happened so far?
Sure. So Canto 1, George are sort of every Christian clothed in the righteous armor of the victorious Christ, has entered into his first adventure, which will be to fight the dragon that holds Princess Una's kingly mother and father, royal mother and father in captivity. They sort of represent Adam and Eve, sort of. However, he is distracted from that quest. He gets lost in the woods and finds a monster called Error, whom he defeats. And right after this adventure, which is way easier than it has any right to be, he encounters a seemingly holy hermit who lures them into his cave and is revealed to be Archimago, the evil wizard, who then tries to lure the Red Cross Knight, from his faithfulness to Una with lustful dreams and with a spirit in the form of Una, attempting to seduce him. But George rises to the occasion and says, "No, that's where we're left."
That's where Book 1 ends. Before we continue to sorry, not Book 1, Canto 1 ends. Before we continue into Canto 2, David, do you want to talk a little bit about Archimago's name? So the names are significant, this being allegorical, but not every character is named exactly what they are. There are a few names, like the House of Pride is a house of pride. There's a character named Despair, who is an embodiment of despair. But we also have characters that they represent many things, or Spenser's being intentionally kind of coy with who they are. So we have this seemingly holy hermit who turns out to be a magician, and his name is Archimago. But David, do you want to talk about some of the double meanings there?
Well, it looks like and sounds like Archmage, right? So chief wizard, grand wizard. Well, maybe not that. So you get the sense that he's powerful and magical, right? It's got that mago, mage, magic element in there. But if you divide the word differently from arche, mago, archmage, into arch, imago, he becomes something like the Greek word arche, meaning head, first, chief, primary, source of, right? It's a word in Greek that has a lot of use, and you might have heard about that in sermons, because Christ is referred to in is it Colossians, where he's called the head of the church, and what exactly that word means is something that you've probably heard exegetes fill that out. It's a word with lots of senses. So he's the Archimago is the arche, the arch, the arc, imago, image. And so image can mean reflection, image, picture, idol, illusion, counterfeit. So when we first meet Archimago, the first image. He is the first counterfeit image in the book. We've met Error, but Error looked evil. Error was not at all deceptive, actually. Error was openly monstrous. Archimago presents as godly, presents as good, as a holy hermit. But he is the first image we encounter, the first false reflection of the true.
And you also pointed out that as we see him as a character coming up again and again and again, he's always in disguise, almost always. Like he adopts multiple disguises in the book, not just the old man, the holy old man. He's the arch magician. He's the one who's constantly behind the scenes. He's not like the big bad guy, but he's always around.
He's the closest thing to through line nemesis that the book has. He and Duessa show up a lot.
In each of the books, you have a sort of different like quest, yes. But he's always there, like this recurring character that's always kind of tripping them up and causing problems.
Because the element of deception,
right,
is an important element in every temptation in every situation of temptation and virtue.
Yeah.
The possibility of making a mistake, of falling into well-intended error.
Well, let's get into Canto 2. So Archimago's original scheme was to get the Red Cross Knight to fall into temptation with this basically, what would you call that? The word's escaping me.
A succubus.
Yeah.
A demon in the form of a woman, inviting him to lust.
Yes. And that fails. And Archimago's very angry, but he has a brilliant idea of taking his two sprite servants and fashioning them into a man and a woman. And then he goes and shakes the Red Cross Knight awake, tells him, your lovely lady she's being unfaithful to you, and shows these two sprites to Red Cross, who gets really angry. I think it's not just at Una's unfaithfulness, but also not just Una's like sin or apparent sin, but also her kind of the duplicity of like, you said you were in love with me and I resisted you, and now you just turn to the next guy. Yeah. So it's kind of this wounded pride. It's not just like, oh, you're so unholy, I'm gonna leave you, but also like, how dare you play me so false, you know?
The two temptations, or the two traps from Archimago, have a consistent thread, both in the theme of faithfulness. First, Red Cross Knight is tempted to be unfaithful to Una, and then next he is tempted to think Una unfaithful to him. Right. So in both cases, there's this betrayal of trust element. The other was not what you thought, and he's already convinced that this is the case, because even though he resisted the spirit in the form of Una, the last thoughts that we see him have in Canto 1 are that he is grieved to think that gentle dame so light, so weak in her own virtue.
Yeah.
So easily swayed in a way that she should not be.
Right. We probably should have defined gentle. I don't know. Did we talk about this in the intro? That gentle does not mean like soft-spoken or soft touch. It means gentlemanly or gentlewomanly. Like you're highly bred, you're noble, you're virtuous. So anyway, that's just a side note.
Yeah. So to say a gentle dame being light, because she is gentle, because she is noble, because she is respected and honored, her honor, her own sense of her honor, ought to be deeper than it apparently is.
Yes, exactly.
Because even though he resisted the temptation, he did not detect the deception.
Right.
That's really important.
In stanza 6, I think this is a good picture of how Red Cross is throughout most of this book. He gets in his head a lot. I mean, sometimes he's rash, sometimes he doubts, but he also just kind of mulls things over in an unhealthy way. Returning to his bed in torment great and bitter anguish of his guilty sight, he could not rest, but did his stout heart eat, and waste his inward gall with deep despite, irksome of life, and too long lingering night. So he's so bothered by it, he just can't let it go. And I think,
Well, I mean, who could?
right, right. And there's another time later in the book where he is described as eating himself. So I think there's a parallel here where he's gnawing at his own heart, kind of mulling this over and just dwelling on it. So he and the dwarf, his squire, Una's squire, leave, abandon Una with her donkey and her lamb, and they go off. Una wakes up all unknown of everything that's happened, and she tries to chase after them. Archimago then also joins the chase, and there's this great description in 9 and 10 of Archimago's ability to disguise himself. He he just can on stanza 10. He's described as he can disguise himself as ever Proteus to himself could make. So a famous shapeshifter. Sometime a fowl, sometime a fish in lake. Now like a fox, now like a dragon fell, that of himself he oft for fear would quake, and oft would fly away. It's like he disguises himself as a dragon and glimpses himself in the mirror, and is so terrified that he runs away from himself. There's all these little moments of humor. But then he dresses up as Red Cross Knight. He wears a bloody cross on his chest, as Spenser says, his coward breast. So he's adopting armor that's not his. But isn't that what Red Cross did at the beginning?
So Red Cross Knight adopts armor that is not his as an act of fidelity. It's part of taking on this quest that he receives that armor. In fact, we know this from the letter that Spenser wrote to Walter Raleigh, in which he unpacks some of the allegory, that it is Una who has the armor and gives it to Red Cross Knight when he takes on this quest to defeat the ultimate image of sin, the quest for holiness. So it's not his armor, but him wearing it is part of fidelity to the Lord that the armor represents. Yeah. So here, when Archimago takes on this image, it's not his armor, but this isn't even the authentic armor.
Right, that's true. That's true. Yeah,
it's a picture of the armor,
and it's sort of dressing up into a role versus adopting a role as a trick to people. You might have a young man dress up in a coat and tie. He doesn't fit that. He's not an adult yet, but he's dressed as an adult with the expectation that he'll grow up into it. Whereas opposed to if a man disguised himself as a cop or something and put on a cop uniform, he's not a police officer, then that would be deceptive.
Right. I mean, you could have a rookie in the same uniform as the veteran, and you wouldn't know by looking at the uniform that he's a veteran, but he is still of the same kind.
Yes.
As the veteran.
Yeah.
Whereas Archimago is not even of the same kind. He's the guy who dresses up as a police officer to pull a prank or stage a crime.
Right.
That last verse of stanza 11, St. George himself ye would have deemed him be. Is that the first time Red Cross Knight has been named?
In the poem, I believe so. We did, in the letter to Raleigh, there's no
ambiguity.
There's no ambiguity. But yeah, this is the first time that, and then in the follow-up stanza, Spenser says, the true St. George was wandered far away. So we do get this revelation. Oh, that's who this is. He's right there.
In the same way that the first time we knew who Una was
in the false image of Una.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Their true nature shows up when the false version appears. That's interesting. Huh. I feel like there's something that will probably come up again. And is it book 3 with the false Florimel?
But that feels like it feels like the sort of thing that a Plato would say, or an Aristotle, or a Thomas Aquinas, that there is no true until there is a false. There is only what is.
There's just no point in using the terminology. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. The term truth is only meaningful when there is a false on the scene. Otherwise, you're simply saying what is.
Okay. Well, I suppose I buy
You know,
that.
almost that Augustinian, there is no evil, evil is a privation kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't want to get too sidetracked here. Um, but I think the idea, even without philosophizing too much, the idea that good is most clearly recognized in the when it's contrasted with wickedness is certainly something that's in the context of a just daily Christian walk that does strike someone. That strikes me as familiar, that you would recognize the good and bad in contrast to each other. So we do meet a few important new characters. One is a Saracen knight named Sans Foy. We learn in a few pages that he has two brothers named Sans Loy and Sans Joy, with their uncreative names. They are without faith, without joy, and without loyalty. And they are the sort of, they're Saracen knights, so they're sort of passingly Muslim knights, but from what I remember, there's never really a specific tie to the Crusades or Muslims or anything like that.
No, I think this is an element. Well, this is an element that Spenser is drawing from the other big source of imagery. We've talked about chivalric romance, like Arthurian, related to King Arthur and his knights. We've talked about classical mythology and classical imagery. And this is the third big one, which is Ludovico Ariosto's poem Orlando Furioso, or The Madness of Orlando, or The Madness of Roland. It's set in the Matter of France, which is a series of chivalric stories centered on Charlemagne and his paladins, the knights of Charlemagne's court. So the Song of Roland is one of is I think the earliest work of the Matter of France. And so if you know the Song of Roland, you know that the primary antagonist of Charlemagne and his paladins is the Moorish invasion coming from North Africa through Spain and into France.
Yeah.
So they are Moors, Muslims. You'll see more Mussulman. Paynim is a word that is often used, and Saracen. Those words are used interchangeably, and it just means in Faerie Queene. They're not Muslims. It just means something like not of the true or not of the right faith.
Yeah, I think they're useful as a foil to the knights, right? So you've got the true knights, and then you have guys that joust and carry swords and ride horses and have armor, who aren't true knights. They're not chivalric. They're bullies. They're the black hats in the Western, that is the Faerie Queene. These are just bad guys. They'll hold up trains, steal women, drink, hard drinkers,
The heels in the professional wrestling terminology.
Exactly. So anyway, we meet our first one, Sans Foy, and he's accompanied by this extremely important character who she's not named for a little bit, but she goes by two names. One is Fidessa, or faithful, but her true name is Duessa, which means double-natured. And so that's kind of how we will refer to her, as Duessa. And like Archimago, she has more than one side to her. She appears as a beautiful woman, the fairest of all, associated with the color red. She's clearly, they're playing off the adulterous woman in Proverbs, Jezebel. Any kind of Delilah, any sort of temptress you can think of is
the Scarlet Woman from the Book of Revelation.
Yes. So any temptress in literature, or in the Bible, or in literature, is kind of encapsulated in this woman Duessa, and she immediately spurs Sans Foy on to attack St. George, who it sounds like is spoiling for a fight at the moment. He's a little upset, and he just sees the knight charging at him, and without question launches himself right back.
Yeah.
And they have it out.
He's in a mood to fight somebody over something.
Right. So it says they're fighting over Duessa. Are they? As soon as Red Cross beats Sans Foy, he rides away, and Duessa has to chase him down. So, is this your favorite Spenserian simile here?
Yeah, we talked at the end of the last episode about the Spenserian simile. So the epic simile you may be familiar with through Homer and Virgil. This long, extended simile that can it could run for lines. In the Odyssey, in the scene where Odysseus requests that the blind minstrel sing the story of the Trojan War, in particular the story of the Trojan horse. It has this long simile of Odysseus crying like a woman whose husband has gone out to fight in the last defense of their city, but who has fallen to the spears of the enemies, and now she knows that she's going to be captured and sold and forced to labor for those same enemies, and her life will be wretched. And it just goes on so long. And that's exactly how Odysseus is crying at this moment. It's very over the top.
And they're often in classical literature, it's comparing great things to small. So you have Achilles is about to kill someone, and then it zooms to like an animal or a farmer or something that the listeners would have been pretty familiar with, like a natural or agricultural image, or sometimes domestic, like someone weaving or cooking. And then it compares it to some great thing. So one of my favorites from the Odyssey is when Odysseus, the night before he kills the suitors, he's sleeping on the ground outside his house, and it describes him like his mind is so active that he can't sleep, and he keeps rolling over and over like a sausage being cooked on a fire, flopping back and forth from one side to the other. So it's this like moment of the heroic mind, and then it's compared to just someone cooking a sausage. But back to the one in the Faerie Queene.
Yeah, so in the Faerie Queene, Spenser does this same thing. It's a trait of epic, and he's doing the epic thing. So this is stanza 16. The Red Cross Knight and the Saracen Sans Foy have just charged at each other, and they've hit each other, but neither has succeeded in knocking down the other. And so stanza 16, as when two rams, stirred with ambitious pride, fight for the rule of the rich fleeced flock, their horned fronts so fierce on either side do meet, that with the terror of the shock, stonied both, and senseless as a block, forgetful of the hanging victory, so stood these twain, unmoved as a rock, both staring fierce and holding idly the broken relics of their former cruelty. So they're both holding their broken spears. Neither has succeeded in unhorsing the other, but they're stunned like two rams who just ran their heads into each other and are slightly concussed.
Yeah.
But it's also an image that characterizes the scene. George is not fighting for the right. He's not fighting error. He's not defending Una. He's not on his quest to kill a dragon. He's just one ram fighting another ram for access to the ewes.
Yeah, he's not like a hunter fighting a boar or a shepherd fighting a lion. They're exactly the same.
Yes,
it's an equal match.
And so Red Cross Knight and the Saracen are now more or less equal. Red Cross Knight has been brought. He has, in some sense, lost his faith. He is fighting the one whose name is without faith, but he also is without faith. He no longer trusts in Una, and he no longer is upholding his faithfulness, his fidelity, his loyalty to Una. He also is Sans Foy, and so they are interchangeable.
There's an interesting moment where the Saracen curses the cross. He says, I would have gotten you, except you're wearing that charmed cross. And then in the next stanza, it says, the sleeping spark of native virtue gan eftsoons revive. And then Red Cross chops Sans Foy's head, splits it down the middle. But that phrase of the sleeping spark of native virtue, there is still a part of Red Cross that is unsullied. I've been paying attention to the idea of virtue because, like Spenser said, that's part of what the goal of the poem was. So even when Red Cross has already made bad decisions, and like you said, he's lost his faith. He's the same. He's just a mirror image of Sansfoy here. There's an element, a spark of virtue in him that Sansfoy lacks, where when the cross is insulted, he fights back.
That's really good.
He chops him and cleft his head. He tumbling down alive with a bloody mouth his mother earth did kiss, greeting his grave. His grudging ghost did strive with the frail flesh. At last it flitted is, whether the souls do fly of men that live amiss. We can all guess where he's going. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Duessa, being the pragmatist that she is, she sees the way the wind's blowing and decides to pursue the stronger ram.
Right.
The one who won. And we find immediately that she's a liar, because in stanza 14, it says she bade her knight address him to the fray. She tells Sansfoy, hey, go attack that guy. And now she said she casts herself as the victim. I was in love with this other guy, this other knight, and then this wicked Saracen has killed my lover and taken me hostage. But I mean, if you're paying attention right from the beginning, you know this is all completely made up. She's not. Her dual nature is, when she describes herself as Fidessa, I don't think anyone's taken in.
Yeah, methinks the lady doth protest too much.
Right.
Yeah, the way that she describes herself, I wondered how you took this. Stanza 22. She was, and here she's telling her backstory, born the sole daughter of an emperor, who he that the wide west under his rule has, and high hath set his throne where Tiberius doth pass. So she identifies herself with the Roman Empire. He, in the first flower of my freshest age, betrothed me unto the only heir of a most mighty king, most rich and sage. Was never prince so faithful and so fair, was never prince so meek and debonair. But ere my hoped day of spousal shone, before I got married, my dearest lord fell from high honor's stair into the hands of his accursed foe, and cruelly was slain. That shall I ever moan. Who is she talking about?
Well, leaping ahead, Duessa's an image of the Roman Church, Roman Catholicism. And associated with Rome, with the Tiber, and the Western Church. Are you thinking, is there a historical figure who would be her prince that is there a prince that, are we talking about, my English history is not great. Yeah. I don't know who we're talking about here.
Well, I think most literally the way that you take it, as she is a kind of a representative of the not true church. Mm-hmm. I think she's talking about Jesus.
Oh.
That she was espoused
one of those times when the answer is Jesus.
Yeah,
Jesus
yeah.
Bible.
I think she is. But if you keep reading in stanza 24, his blessed body spoiled of lively breath was afterward, I know not how, conveyed and from me hid, of whose most uninnocent death, when tidings came to me, unhappy made, oh, how great sorrow my sad soul assayed. Then forth I went, his woeful corse or corpse to find, and many years throughout the world I strayed, a virgin widow. So
you're taking this as her actual backstory?
Well, she's telling the backstory of, I was betrothed to this prince, and he fell among his foes, and he was killed, but then his body went missing, and I've been looking for it. But she also represents a false church. What makes it false? She knows the death, but she doesn't know of the resurrection.
I think if I didn't know just how ugly she is underneath, I would maybe be able to accept that she's just misguided. If she just found out about the resurrection, then she would no longer be Duessa. She would be Una. But Duessa seems like, especially when you get to the fight with her, where she is clearly associated with the beast of Revelation and the death of the saints, and that if she was deceived, then she's wallowing in her deception.
Well, I don't think she's deceived. I think she's deceiving. But she tells a story that's very much like the story we learned at the beginning of stanza 1 about the story of St. George's armor, which was the armor of his dying Lord, but who dying as risen he adored. So she tells also this story of being loyal to a dying Lord, but there's no risenness about him. I think too, there's maybe this may feel like a stretch, but there's some Henry VIII-ness.
Well, see, that's what I thought
here.
where I thought you were going.
Yeah.
That there's a prince,
The
like the Western Church there was a connection with England because of Henry VIII, and then it was separated. But as we pointed out in the introduction, it could be all of the above. This is the kind of allegorical richness that is not just one interpretation, but because of the way the images overlay, it could be that he's pulling multiple meanings into the same thing.
Well, who married a princess who was strongly tied to Rome, who was espoused to a prince who died?
Again, my English history is not good. Why don't you just
Henry VIII. Well, he marries Catherine of Aragon, the Princess of Spain, and Spain was strongly tied to the Roman Church against the rising Protestant movement under Luther. Catherine of Aragon was she was to marry Henry's older brother who died, and then Henry marries Catherine, and it is in his persona as English king who has made marriage alliance with Catholic Spain that he is the defender of the faith, writing a treatise against Luther. In some senses, you're seeing, I think there's some English Protestant church history kind of here.
Which, again, going back to how we introduced the book, I think Spenser probably would have connected all those things together. That the political and the religious errors are essentially the same error. You are in error because maybe you deny the resurrection or you deny the faith, and that has caused your political authority is now suspect or twisted because of your theological errors. So yeah, I think there's probably all of the above. I do. So getting back to the story here, she gives Red Cross this whole backstory, and then in stanza 26, it says, "He in great passion all this while did dwell, more busying his quick eyes her face to view than his dull ears to hear what she did tell." So she gives him this whole sob story, and it says he just thought she was pretty.
Yeah.
He wasn't really. I mean, this guy's got a one-track mind at this point.
He wasn't listening real hard.
No, yeah. Which causes trouble for him.
Well, and he's on the rebound, He's really vulnerable right now.
It is interesting as we get through book 1 to see what actually causes his downfall. It's not just lust. There are other elements at play too. They start traveling together, and then we get to it's a hot day. The sun is high, and so they go and camp out under a couple of trees. That the narrator tells us no shepherd would ever sit under these trees because it's an unlucky ground in stanza 28. But they don't know that. In stanza 30, Red Cross is going to make her a little crown of leaves to make her to adorn her.
It's almost like a montage.
Yeah.
You can hear the pretty music playing in the background. And you're like, oh, okay. I see what's being set up here.
And then he breaks off some branches to weave this garland, and there's a piteous yelling voice and drops of blood. So the montage would be quickly interrupted.
Oh, no.
And we get this other character named Fradubio, or I suppose you could take that, I guess in Italian, it would be something like Brother Doubtful. And he gives his backstory. There's clearly overtones of the Aeneid here with the character that Aeneas they're gathering wood or something right after they've right after they've left Troy, and they're intending to settle. It's one of the first places they stop. I think it's in Thrace or something, just north of Troy, and they're planning on building a new city there. And this Trojan or Trojan relative who's been turned into a tree warns them not to. That it's ground that they should not dwell on. So there's some overtones there. It's not exactly the same. There's quite a lot of parallels between Fredubio and the Red Cross. So he does provide. He's a warning sign if Red Cross has ears to hear. And so I guess his backstory is I was in love with this woman. Her name was Phryllissa, I think. Phryllissa in stanza 37. And then I encountered a knight who was escorting a beautiful woman named Duessa. I defeated him, and then I ended up having two ladies, which was great at first. And then Duessa ended up she uglified Phryllissa at first,
Yeah.
and then eventually turned her into a tree so that Fredubio goes off with Duessa and then sees her in her true form, which he describes as misshapen, a filthy, foul old woman I did view, that ever to have touched her I did deadly rue.
Ew.
Her nether parts misshapen, monstrous, were hid in water that I could not see, but they did seem more foul and hideous than woman-shaped man would believe to be. And so he tries to sneak away. She notices and takes him and puts him, basically plants him as a tree but next to Phryllissa. So at least they're together in death. But we do get to hear Duessa's nether parts described later on. Yep, Spenser's not satisfied just saying, yeah, they were really bad. Let's move on. So again, we get this pretty clear warning to Red Cross, but he's just totally. So he does not put together that Fidessa, his new lady, and Duessa that he just heard about from Fredubio are the same.
In the same way that he was hardly listening.
Yeah.
When Fidessa, Duessa tells her backstory that's meant to make him feel ambitious and piteous and attracted to her. Similarly, he doesn't seem to be paying much attention to what's going on here either.
No, he's not super aware of his surroundings. He really needs the. It's one of those stories not of a slow growth in a character, but of basically a slow fall followed by growth. He's not climbing the mountain of sanctification. He's falling down the mountain of sanctification and then kind of has to go through all this training later on.
It makes sense in a certain kind of way that we'll see much more fully developed later. But the shape of forward progress in Red Cross Knight's life, just as the shape of forward progress is in the Christian life, the shape of forward progress is repentance. So that it's not necessarily the sins he easily has recognized and resisted that are the real victories. It's becoming aware of the weaknesses he did not have, becoming properly grieved over failings that were there and he was simply unaware of. So he has to fall so that he sees that he is vulnerable, so that he can change.
Right, which is, again, not how pre-Christian epics are told. I suppose Aeneas has a similar, a slightly similar arc. He doesn't really have to go through repentance exactly, but he does go through humiliation. He's tempted to stay with Dido. He has to go through this experience in the underworld. And after that, all his doubts are gone, essentially. Odysseus has a similar journey through the underworld, and he comes out like more firm of purpose. But it's definitely not repentance for Odysseus. There's no moment of repentance for him.
He doesn't need to change character. He just needs to get back home.
He needs to get back home and, I guess, harden it in his resolve. But even Odysseus doesn't. If there's anything that he needs to kind of change about himself, it's his curiosity. Like he needs to stop. Even in his underworld journey, he's venturing further and further into the underworld until kind of the spirit of Hercules scares him and he turns around and runs the other direction. But yeah, that's his main flaw, I would
Incuriosity
say.
and falling asleep at the wrong time.
Yes, he does fall asleep a lot. Yeah.
But this is so we have a warning here, and we were talking about this before we were recording. But what is the function of us learning who Archimago is before he begins to act against St. George? Or what is the function of learning who Duessa is before she leads our hero astray? And there is a narrative function to that knowledge. George is tricked, but we are not, so that we are able to more readily benefit from Spenser's dramatization of evil's wiles when eventually Duessa is unveiled to Red Cross Knight. To him, it is a surprise. To us, it is a long-awaited narrative payoff. We've been waiting for her to get caught.
Yeah. There's if it was a surprise, you would essentially have to go back and reread and pick up on all the signs, and that would be the educational part. What clues did I miss? But if you know beforehand what the explanation is, then all the clues, you are identifying them as you read. You know, oh, this woman is bad news, and so everything she does, you're looking at with a critical eye. I guess that's maybe one of the powers of allegory as a teaching tool, because you know through the characters' names whether or not you should follow what they're doing. Are you should you be on their side, or should you be suspicious of them? If someone's called double nature, you're like, I'm going to keep an eye on this person.
Though she doesn't call herself double nature. She calls herself Lady Faith. So, which is what George has lost. He has lost faith in Una because he believes that she has broken faith with him. He is sans foi, he is without faith, but he's looking for faith. He wants to believe. And here is Lady Faith, ready for him to be faithful to, and to be faithful to him. Which is why I think he so readily attaches to her.
He's also really swayed by appearance. Like, why did he
Yes.
leave Una in the first place? Because of something that he saw that was false. Why does he stick with Duessa? Because he saw that she was beautiful, which was also false. You know, that being tricked by appearances, it comes up a lot. He needs to learn how to see correctly, which I think is part of the whole episode with contemplation.
But Spenser is giving us those eyes, though.
Yes, exactly.
In the same way that I love mysteries, and I'm always trying to solve the mystery before the end, before the big reveal at the end, when Poirot or whoever gathers everyone into a room and gives a speech. But I also love Columbo mysteries.
How catch 'em.
Yes, right. Where you know exactly who did it and how from the opening scene. Like, the story opens with the murder. The character that you first identify with or see as a protagonist is the murderer. And so the whole episode, the tension of the episode is not who done it, but how will the detective Columbo catch them? Will they be caught? How will they be caught? What error did they make that gives them away is how the plots work. And so here, while George is experiencing a mystery that will be unveiled later, we're experiencing a Columbo episode.
Right.
Where we're watching evil being done.
Yeah.
We have the insight to see how he thought error died in the first half of Canto 1.
Right.
What we know is that the problem of error persists.
It makes you wonder if, if the universe of the Faerie Queene were the real like, does Red Cross recognize that characters in his world have names that reveal who they are? And if our world was like that, what would your allegorical name be?
Right.
And because that would, it would have some of that same significance. Like, if you were best friends with someone who was called traitor.
Yes.
You're like, wait a second. Well, there's some humor like that in the Bible too. So you've got this character Nabal, which in Hebrew means fool.
Yeah.
And he is married to Abigail, and he's rude to David's men. And David sallies forth to go kill him and all his house. And Abigail comes out and says, hey, he's a fool. Don't waste your time. This guy's a fool. And we've known that since the beginning because we knew that.
Because that's his name.
Right. Or Abraham's name means big, like the great father. That's what you call this character over and over and over. And then the great father went here, and then the great father went here. And you're like, where are his children? Does he have any kids? So there's all these, it's a suspense or humor or irony that's brought about because of the significance of their names.
Yeah. I mean, it would be difficult to imagine someone operating in the Faerie Queene universe or the Pilgrim's Progress universe and not knowing who to trust and who to avoid, because literally it's on their name tag.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Hopeful. Like, I think you'll be my buddy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there'd be like a contemporary. I can imagine someone trying to rewrite Pilgrim's Progress from the perspective of Mr. Worldly Wiseman, or from the perspective of Doubtful or Sloth or somebody where there's like, no, it really wasn't as bad as all that. My parents just gave me this name. I had good reasons for doing what I did, trying to capture their perspective.
Well, maybe what Spenser is doing with names like Archimago, Fraudubio, Sans Foy, Fidessa, Duessa, and even Una is showing us linguistically that a certain kind of spiritual wisdom, a certain kind of spiritual perception is necessary for being able to negotiate this life and its dangers and its temptations and the mistakes that can be made along the way. If you only read the Faerie Queene in one language, those characters catch you off guard. But if you have the deeper insight of other languages, whether French or Italian or Latin or Greek, if you have that other insight, then you're able to see plainly what is there in the name. George only reads in one language. He only reads at the level of the letter. Yeah. He doesn't perceive what is happening to him.
I can imagine teaching this to students, and say you're teaching at a classical school and they know Latin. Certain names, they'd be like, I know what this character, like, I bet this guy's not trustworthy because his name means whatever. Or if they knew Italian, which none of my students know Italian. But you can see those moments of, I can see where this is going. Yeah, which Red Cross, is there a character that does have that? I guess Arthur perhaps can see things. He can see through to the heart of things, and he's not as susceptible to trickery.
He's much more perceptive. I can't think of an episode in which Arthur is misled.
Well, does he fight Archimago when Archimago's dressed up as Red Cross? Is that who fights him?
No, Red Cross.
Is it one of the Sands?
Archimago is unhorsed by one of the brothers.
That's right. And then
by Sans Loy.
Yeah, and then
who then rides off with
Una. And then doesn't Arthur rescue Una from Sans Loy? I
think that's right.
Or is it the lion? The lion's in Canto 3. So
the lion's coming up.
Yeah.
Nope. The lion. The brother Sans defeats the lion.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. The lion is not long for this world, sadly.
No, that's too bad. I really wish he stuck around.
Yeah, I really wanted the adventures of Una with lion and lamb.
That is one of that would be a good comic strip, actually.
Yeah, it would be.
But that's one of the more famous images of the Faerie Queene, Una and the lion. I think people like the contrast of the violent, terrifying animal, wild animal, and the pure maiden. But it appeared on coins. It's a subject of paintings. Una and the lion
doesn't actually last that long, though.
No, it's just one that sticks in people's minds.
Yeah,
it's like again in the Odyssey, the episode of the sirens or of the lotus eaters. They're like a page or less. There's just not. The Cyclops episode is long, but the other ones are like. But if you're writing an adaptation, you spin out the lotus eaters into like a whole chapter.
Well, almost the only thing that people know about the Odyssey is those 4 books in the middle, 9, 10, 11, 12, which is Odysseus telling the story of his travels. You get the impression that the Odyssey is this book that's mostly about his adventures on his voyages, but no, it's actually mostly about
Telemachus.
the events shortly before him getting back home. But in the middle of it, he tells a story that is expansive.
I mean, the entire
and
second
that's the
half
bit we
is
remember.
him basically almost back on Ithaca and then back on Ithaca and plotting the whole thing. That is the majority of the book.
Yeah, the undercover boss section.
Yes, exactly. All right, I think that is it for Canto 2. We will be back with Canto 3 next time.